The South China Sea is more than just a body of water. It has become the world's most consequential geopolitical flashpoint. Here, the ambitions of a rising superpower, China, collide directly with the interests of the established global power, the United States. Trillions of dollars in global trade transit through these lanes every year, but beneath the surface of this vital economic artery lies a simmering military rivalry. The waters are dotted with newly constructed military bases, patrolled by warships from two competing navies, and shadowed by the constant risk of miscalculation. This is not a distant abstract problem, it's a present and escalating challenge that holds the potential to reshape the international order as we know it. The central question that hangs over this tense standoff is stark. If the simmering tensions were to boil over into open conflict, who would hold the advantage? This is not a simple query with a straightforward answer. It involves a complex calculus of military might, geographic proximity, technological superiority, economic endurance, and diplomatic capital. Understanding this balance of power requires us to look beyond mere numbers of ships or planes. We must examine the strategic doctrines, the logistical chains, the regional alliances, and the political will of both Washington and Beijing. China's strategy in the South China Sea has been methodical, patient, and profoundly transformative. Over the past decade, Beijing has engaged in an unprecedented campaign of island building, dredging sand from the seabed to turn submerged reefs and rocky outcrops into full-fledged artificial islands. These are not idyllic resorts, they are sophisticated military installations. These man-made fortresses, such as those on Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef, now feature long runways capable of accommodating bombers and fighter jets, advanced radar arrays, and hardened shelters for missile launchers. This physical transformation is underpinned by a sweeping and legally controversial territorial claim known as the Nine-Dash Line. This demarcation, first appearing on Chinese maps in the 1940s, lays claim to roughly 90% of the South China Sea, overriding the internationally recognized exclusive economic zones of its neighbors. While Beijing insists its claims are rooted in historical rights, this position was overwhelmingly rejected by an international tribunal at The Hague in 2016. China, however, has dismissed the ruling as null and void, choosing instead to enforce its claims through its powerful and ever-growing Navy and Coast Guard. The People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, is the sharp end of this strategy. It has grown at a staggering pace to become the largest navy in the world by number of vessels, a modern force designed specifically to operate in these waters. Its fleet of advanced destroyers, frigates, and submarines is complemented by a massive coast guard and a maritime militia composed of fishing vessels. This layered force allows China to harass and intimidate other claimants' vessels, often operating in a gray zone below the threshold of open conflict. Ultimately, China's actions are driven by a cohesive grand strategy to establish anti-access and area denial, or A2/AD capabilities. The goal is to make it too costly and too risky for the US military to operate close to China's shores in the event of a conflict, particularly one over Taiwan. The island bases, the powerful navy, and the land-based carrier-killer ballistic missiles all work in concert to create a formidable defensive bubble. It is a bold, long-term gambit to rewrite the region's strategic map in its favor. The United States has responded to China's assertiveness not with a new grand strategy, but by reinforcing its long-standing role as the principal guarantor of regional security and freedom of the seas. The most visible element of this response is its freedom of navigation operations, or FONOPs. In these missions, U.S. Navy warships, typically destroyers or cruisers, deliberately sail within the 12 nautical mile territorial limit that China claims around its artificial islands. These patrols are not designed to be overtly aggressive, but are a powerful legal and political statement. Beyond these symbolic patrols, the bedrock of American strategy in the Indo-Pacific remains its network of alliances and partnerships. These relationships, forged over decades, are an asymmetric advantage that China cannot easily replicate. The U.S. has formal defense treaties with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and Thailand. It has also cultivated strong security partnerships with countries like Vietnam, Singapore, and India. To give these alliances teeth, the United States continues to deploy formidable military power to the region. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet, based in Japan, is a powerful force that includes an aircraft carrier strike group, amphibious assault ships, and some of the most advanced submarines in the world. Furthermore, the U.S. regularly conducts large-scale joint military exercises with its allies, such as the biennial RIMPAC naval drills. These exercises are not only vital for ensuring interoperability among allied forces, but also serve as a clear demonstration of American commitment and combat readiness to any potential adversary watching. The overarching goal of this American strategy is to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. This vision promotes a rules-based international order where disputes are settled peacefully, commerce flows freely, and sovereign nations can make their own choices without being coerced by larger powers. It is a strategy of persistence, presence, and partnership, designed to convince China that the costs of aggression would far outweigh any potential benefits. The contest in the South China Sea is not just a military one, it's also being fought in the arenas of international law and diplomacy. The central legal pillar here is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, which sets out a comprehensive framework for governing the world's oceans. A landmark moment came in 2016 when an arbitral tribunal ruled decisively in favor of the Philippines in its case against China. The tribunal invalidated China's 9-line claim, finding it had no basis in international law. However, China immediately rejected the verdict, calling it a piece of waste paper, and has continued its activities without pause. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, a bloc of 10 regional countries, finds itself in a particularly tough position. 4 of its members, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, are direct claimants in the South China Sea dispute. But as a group, ASEAN has struggled to form a unified stance against China, mainly because of Beijing's huge economic influence over some member states like Cambodia and Laos. China has skillfully used this leverage to stop the bloc from issuing strong, consensus-based condemnations of its actions. The reactions from the wider international community have been mixed, but they're increasingly tilting toward the United States' position. Major powers like Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany have become more vocal in their support for a rules-based maritime order, and have even increased their own naval patrols in the region. They see China's behavior not just as a regional issue but as a challenge to the global commons that could set a dangerous precedent if left unchecked. Still, many other nations, especially in the developing world, are hesitant to take sides, valuing their economic ties with China. Comparing the military might of the United States and China in the South China Sea, you get this classic strategic dilemma. It's the clash between a regionally focused power and a global one. On paper, China's People's Liberation Army Navy is now the world's largest by hull count, a massive fleet built at an absolutely breathtaking speed. But this numerical superiority is concentrated almost entirely in its near seas, which gives China a significant local advantage. In a short, sharp conflict confined to the South China Sea, China could probably bring more ships and land-based missiles to bear than the United States could muster in the initial days. The United States, however, maintains a decisive qualitative and technological edge. The U.S. Navy's 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers are still the ultimate symbol of global power projection, each one basically a floating airbase with more combat power than most countries' entire air forces. The U.S. has a significant lead in undersea warfare, with nuclear-powered attack submarines that are quieter and more capable than their Chinese counterparts. This underwater advantage could prove critical in any conflict, letting the U.S. threaten Chinese warships and disrupt sea lanes. Logistics and sustainment are another huge point of comparison. China's military benefits from much shorter supply lines, with its forces operating just a few hundred miles from mainland bases. In contrast, the United States would face the tyranny of distance. Sustaining a high-intensity conflict thousands of miles from home would be a monumental logistical challenge. China's A2/AD strategy is designed to target these logistical vulnerabilities, using long-range missiles to attack U.S. bases in Guam and Japan, as well as the supply chain ships and planes. The balance of power shifts depending on the scenario. In a limited short-term clash, China's proximity and numerical strength might give it an early edge. It could seize an objective and present the U.S. with a fait accompli. But in a protracted full-scale war, the equation changes dramatically. America's superior technology, global logistics, experienced personnel, and powerful allies would likely come to the fore. The United States could impose a distant blockade on China, crippling its economy and wearing down its military over time. Imagining how a conflict might begin in the South China Sea is, honestly, all too easy. It could start with a miscalculation, maybe a collision between a U.S. destroyer and a Chinese warship, or a Chinese jet fighter harassing a U.S. surveillance plane too aggressively, leading to a crash. The initial incident might be small, but the pressure to respond on both sides would be absolutely immense. Nationalism, stoked by state media in China and political pressure in the US, could quickly push leaders toward escalation. A localized naval skirmish could rapidly expand to include missile strikes on bases, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, and economic warfare, like freezing assets and imposing sanctions. The conflict could also escalate horizontally, spreading to other flashpoints like the Taiwan Strait or the East China Sea. The involvement of allies would be a critical and unpredictable factor. If conflict erupted over the defense of the Philippines, the United States would be obligated by treaty to intervene, possibly drawing in other allies like Australia and Japan. When you really analyze the potential outcome, it becomes clear that a win in any traditional sense would be elusive for either side. China might achieve a short-term tactical victory by seizing a contested island or sinking a US vessel, but it would face devastating long-term consequences. For the United States, even a military victory would come at a staggering price. The human and material losses would be immense, likely the highest since World War II. Its military would be battered, and the economic cost of a war with its largest trading partner would plunge the US and the entire world into a deep depression. So the ultimate reality of a US-China conflict in the South China Sea is that there would be no true winner. The real victor would be chaos, and the primary loser would be the entire world, which would suffer the consequences of these two giants coming to blows. The ultimate challenge is not to prepare to win such a war, but to find the wisdom to prevent it.